Aunt Esther, it's such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for joining me for this conversation. We're so excited to have the opportunity to show the film that you're in about your hometown of Quince Orchard and really the story of community coming together. And I think it'd be wonderful for our viewers if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you're from and who you are.
Thank you, Jason, my great nephew. My name is Esther Holman Jackson Lyons. I'm the youngest of 8 children born to Samuel and Evelyn Holman. My husband is Curtis Lyons, one of 15 children from North Carolina. We have been married, it will be 41 years in March of this year. We have 2 daughters, Pamela, who is also a Pleasantview trustee, whose husband is Squaw, the pastor of Greater Beulah Baptist Church in PG County, and also daughter Darlene Jackson, who lives in DC. We have 6 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. Everyone lives in the Maryland, DC area except for granddaughter Nia, who lives in Houston, Texas.
Awesome. Does that do it, Aunt Esther?
Yes, I just had the insert about the June Fest.
Say that one more time.
I just had the insert about the June Fest that needs to be inserted about the June Fest, because I didn't mention anything about it the last time.
Oh, do you want me to ask you about that?
Right. Who was the speaker? Who was the speaker that we had that came from out of town?
His name was, what was his name? Christopher. Hold on, I got it right here. Christopher Gardner, right? That was the gentleman who was The Pursuit of Happiness.
Right.
Will Smith played. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then I can ask you, you want me to ask you about the June Fest?
Yes.
Okay. And I know you mentioned being a trustee at Pleasantview, where there's been so many activities over the years, one of which most recently every year is June Fest, where the community is invited to see the schoolhouse and the church. Can you tell us your memories of June Fest, why it exists?
June Fest, once a year, was celebrated on Memorial Day, which is when families came to visit the Pleasantview site and laid flowers on the deceased graves. We had a program with singing, and Curtis sold hamburgers and hot dogs and drinks. And one of the main events of the day was the wrapping of the maypole, which was organized by Helen Thompson. Later, we changed this activity to June, which was called then the June Fest. We invited various singing groups like Seneca Mass Choir and the Royal Harmonizers, mainly because some of the members or ancestors of these groups attended Quince Orchard Elementary School to perform at this occasion. Our Pleasantview trustees arrived early to set up tents and chairs and tables for vendors and people that made donations to the Pleasantview Historical Site. Of course, we had to have a dessert table by Sister Pearl. Curtis increased the menu to fried chicken or fried fish with drinks, with the expenses donated by the Pleasantview trustees, of which he was a member. We had various speakers, the county executive, Ike Leggett. We had Vernon Ricks, who was a parliamentarian for the NAACP. We also had Christopher Gardner, who is the author of The Pursuit of Happiness, which is what the film that Will Smith played in. It was an event enjoyed by all. All Pleasantview activities were supported by Fairhaven United Methodist Church, and that is why I am so proud to say that I am a member of Fairhaven, because they donated not only to the cake table, the dessert table, but they came down and helped us set up. They came down for the program, and I am just so happy to know that Fairhaven is my church.
You've traveled all over the world, Aunt Esther. You've gone on these cruises and all these places, and yet you continue to live in the community in which you grew up, the
Yes.
community of Quince Orchard. And
Yes.
so to help us understand what Quince Orchard was and why it means so much to you? Why are you still in that community?
Well, when I was born, the last of 7, 8 kids, um, I was raised on this little narrow road. I had white neighbors. I had neighbors that I played with. So therefore, I knew nothing about segregation when I came up to the fact that, I didn't see where there was any difference between white and black, because we had white neighbors that came up to our house all the time, especially a couple of neighbors that came up when it was storming and they were scared of the storm. So they would always come up and sit with my mother while the storm was going on. I played with the white kids, but on Sunday morning, we went to a black church. I was younger, so therefore I was told, I don't remember, that I was cursed by my brother and sisters because I was the youngest one. But we walked down to Pleasantview Church and we had morning service. So I understand that I was cursed on someone's back. So of course I don't remember that. But we had morning service. We had sometimes afternoon service. Sometimes we had night services. We not merged, but we visited other churches in the area, churches up in the Seneca area, the Poolsville, Dawsonsville, Martinsburg, all of those different areas of Montgomery County. We even went down to Rockville and visited Mount Calvary and Clinton Church. So it wasn't like we were in a bubble that we just stayed to ourselves. But as we got older, we did merge out to other churches, because our school that I attended, the Quince Orchard School that closed in 1951, that was the elementary school. And I remember having our graduation exercise. And it was a big day for us because, we were dressed in our white dresses and we moved from the school down to the church. And we had one of the pianists from Lincoln High School to come and play for us. And so we had this wonderful graduation. And at that time, it was the last graduation that we had at Quince Orchard Elementary School before we moved on to Lincoln High School in Rockville.
That's so interesting. Just talking about where you grew up on that narrow lane, where you had neighbors that were white, but then when you went to church and to school, it was segregated. How did you handle that?
Well, at that time, I paid no attention to it because I thought that's the way the world was. That we were supposed to go to our segregated school in church, and they were supposed to do whatever they wanted to do on the weekend, and I just played with them during the week. So I didn't know any difference until I got older and realized that there is a difference between black and white in our community.
Wow. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you remember going to the Quince Orchard Colored School? What was that school like?
I remember going to Quince Orchard School. Of course, we didn't have buses and that type of thing. But I remember going to the school, and I remember having a old potbelly stove sitting in the school, which is what we use for heat. I remember it was one room that I had my lessons in. It was a 3-room school. One of the rooms burnt down, and then we had 2 rooms. I remember meeting my closest friend, and she's still my closest friend, from Seneca. We had kids to come down from Seneca Church, and from that community, we had kids to come to our school from from Tobytown, Maryland. So they were brought up to the school. So we had the opportunity to meet other kids from other areas. We had lunch. We had no inside facilities. So we had a little toilet outside, one for the boys and one for the girls, one building, but boys on one side, girls on the other side. And this is a toilet that we used when we had to use those facilities. We had a flagpole, and I can remember having flagpole lessons where we wrapped a flagpole on Flag Day. And it was fun. you know, we knew no difference. We knew no difference between black and white. And so we look forward to seeing each other. And the fact that we met up with other communities and saw these other people from that same community on Sundays, then to me, I knew nothing about, you know, the fact that there was segregation. All I knew was that I was going to school and I was having a wonderful time, and the school was heated and I had a toilet and we went outside and we played and everything was fine.
Now, you talk about the Pleasantview Historic Site, and that's the site where the Pleasantview Church is, on the same piece of land is where your former school, the Quince Orchard Colored School, is. And so it sounds like that was almost the center of the Black community. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say that that was the center of the community. During the week, we went to the Quince Orchard Colored School for elementary school lessons. That was grade 1 through 6. And then on Sunday, we came to the Pleasantview Historic Church and we had our morning services. We had Sunday school, sometimes up in the school, because we did not have the facilities, you know, to have Sunday school at the church. But we did eventually have toilets put into the school so that even in the wintertime when it was cold, if we went to church and had to go to the toilet, then we had to walk up to the school to use the toilet. But Sunday morning was a time of pleasure. It was a time of seeing everyone. It was a time of remembrance of all the wonderful things that God has done for each one of us, all the different families, because we had the Ridgeleys and we had the Thompsons and the Greens and the Harmons and the Prathers and so many different families that we had there. We had families to come up from Rockfield. The Prathers came up from Rockfield for our morning services. So it was like, you know, it was something to look forward to on Sunday morning.
Esther, I wonder if you could sort of talk about Pleasantview and just all the resources that went into making sure it was able to be sustained and preserved over the years.
One of the biggest resources that we had was the dinner, bi-yearly dinner that we had at Fairhaven Church. This was our fundraiser. We had it twice a year, and then as we got older, then we cut it down to once a year. And as the 9/11 attack took place, then we had to cut it down to once a year. But we had this dinner at the church to raise funds. I met a young man back in our day named Curtis Lyons from North Carolina, and he loved to cook. Curtis and I had been married almost 41 years. And he loves to cook. And one of the things that he mentioned to me was, if you want to raise money for Pleasantview, then why don't you have a dinner? And I was like, a dinner? That seems like a lot of work. But him being from North Carolina and catering, he said, we can do it. So he took off a couple days to buy the food and prepare the food. And we made up flyers, and we sent out flyers to NIST, we sent out flyers to the NIH, National Geographic, all of these different places, and also all of the Montgomery County schools, and not to leave out Howard County schools, because your father used to bring dinners, come over and pick up dinners and take them back over to Howard County to sell. This was our biggest fundraiser. We would raise close to $3,000 each time that we had the dinner, and everyone was always looking forward to the dinner. Now, this was one of the prize things that Curtis was famous for, was cooking, because he loved to cook. And everyone in the family knew that he loved to cook. So he had his family to come up for the dinner. We had people from NIST to come over at night with Bill Phillips for our dinner. So there were so many different things that we used to do to raise money. But this was the biggest thing that we had. And if it hadn't been for the knowledge that Kurt brought from North Carolina, then we would not have been able to raise $6,000, $7,000 a year to keep the Pleasantview project from going on.
And that was my favorite dinner, because you could get the rib plate or the chicken plate or the fish plate, and you would pre-order ahead of time. And you know, honestly, as I hear you tell that story, it just feels like it's a part of the history.
Yes.
That was talking about opportunities to build community,
Mhm.
opportunities to break bread. And
Right.
is that what that was? I mean, obviously it was Uncle Kurt bringing his talent, but you were also creating opportunity for people to break bread with one another.
That's right, because we had members from Fairhaven that came out and worked in the kitchen right along with us, and then sat down and had dinner as their families came to have dinner with them in the afternoon. So that was one of the ways that we got to know our Fairhaven members better. So it was a learning experience for the people from Pleasant View as well as the people from Fairhaven.
Amen. And I'd be remiss not to mention, people like Uncle Kurt and all of the trustees who,
Yes.
who have sort of just sacrificed so much after the merger. It was really the trustees who were responsible for the last 50 years of making sure that Pleasant View continues, right?
That is correct. And we had Charles Thompson Jr. as president of the trustees after your grandfather passed. And he took over the leadership. He lives in Frederick. He would come down and help us prepare for these dinners. So he would be down there at least 2 days along with Curtis. And it was just it was a time of a lot of work, but it was a time of fellowship. It was a time of getting to know our Fairhaven sisters and brothers. And it was a time of having people come up from Washington, D.C. We had a niece that came over from Virginia to help, PG County, just all over the area to help with this dinner.
And what were the Greens and the Holmans? I assume Quince Orchard, as we look back, was predominantly farming community. Did you grow up on a farm? Is that so? What were most of the people in Quince Orchard up to?
Quince was a farming community. My father had he called a quote, a farm. We had cows, we had a horse, we had chickens. I remember my mother going out killing chickens for Sunday dinner, cutting the heads off the chicken. And I remember the chicken jumping around and everything, but I remember the wonderful meals that we had on Sunday because my mother always fixed meals for Sunday. She fixed them on Saturday so that we would have everything ready to warm up after we came out of church on Sunday. And then after church, most of the time we had to go back to another service or we were going to another church for another service. So it was a small community, Quince Orchard. We did not have any major stores. We had a store, Mr. Donald Snyder's store, which was, I understand, a retired policeman, I believe. Him and his mother that used to look over the counter in the back when we came in. But we all just went down there to get that candy and he would just sell us candy over there. So we were able to walk down to his store. Our major stores were in Rockville. So we had to, my father had to drive to Rockville to get our main groceries. We were like, which didn't bother me because as I said, I didn't know that there was any difference, that there was a big city out there, except for Rockville and Hayti was the only thing that I knew of, except for the Martinsburg and the Seneca and Tobertown, because they came to our church and to our school.
I'm totally struck, Esther, by the remembrances, the fond remembrances, but of not having running water, of not having a store, sometimes not having electricity, of having to travel a long time to Rockville to actually have, access to resources. So it sounds like you didn't have as much then as we have now, but yet we think fondly of that time.
Yes, that was a great time. As you said, we did not have running water. I remember having to well and going outside and having to pour the bucket up to have water. I remember using the stool that we had rather than go outside. My mother and father furnished that so we wouldn't have to go outside in the cold. So, but we knew no different. We thought this is the way that we were supposed to live until we found out later that we were really considered back in not the Stone Age, but back in the past.
Yeah, I imagine in some respects probably considered poor, but I get the sense you didn't feel poor.
No, I did not feel poor because we had a garden. We used to go out and work in the garden. We had livestock, so they butchered. I can remember us bringing, my father bringing the hogs down to your grandfather's house, and that was a big, big to do. That we would go down there in November, and they would butcher hogs, and we would have Watson and Mabel Prather come up from Rockville, and they would butcher the hogs, and we would have sit down at the table, and we would have homemade cooked, sausage and pudding and all of these different things from the hog. So to us, we had meat. We had the bread man who had a truck that came by once a week, and on his truck he had bread, he had milk, he had the other essentials that that we did not have on our farm. So it was something to look forward to be able to wait for the bread man to come by on the weekend, or sometimes was twice a week, and we were able to get our little candy, that cost like 3 cents, and it was just a blessing. To us, it was a blessing.
I get the sense that you also then had this like community spirit almost that manifests itself in visiting one another, and then I imagine at Pleasantview.
Yes, yes, we had a community spirit where we did go around to each other's houses and we visit each other. I can also remember that your grandfather was the first person in the community to get a TV. And so we just had a wonderful time because we would come down to his house, and that would mean people from Donaldstown, because we had relatives in Donaldstown, and we had Mr. David Smith and his family that came to our church. And so once or twice a week, we would meet at your grandfather's house, Gerard Green's house, and we would look at TV. Of course, it was mostly wrestling because that's what the men wanted to look at. But we had times that we joined together and we had a good time. We knew no difference. And Pearl, your grandmother, would always have dessert for us. And the same as when we were doing butchering, she would always have to fix the meal for us. There was always dessert. There was always salad, the Watergate salad that she would fix. And we just had a wonderful time.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. Just, it really speaks and harkens to now when we can't gather, how important those gatherings are, just being able to
Amen.
be with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Esther, I wonder if I could take you to back to Pleasantview, because a lot of, we're going to be talking about the film and kind of what was going through the minds and hearts of folks at Pleasantview back in the late 60s. As they were sort of faced with this decision as to whether or not to merge their congregation. And do you remember, can you take us back? Like, what were people really thinking about? What did that time feel like?
Well, Jason, being the youngest in the family, I just more or less went along with whatever my brothers and sisters and my parents told us. But I can remember the many meetings, especially with my brother, Melvin. He was heading the meetings where we were trying to make this decision of whether we were going to merge with the two other churches, McDonald Chapel and Hunting Hill, to form Fairhaven. And the meetings that we had were kind of heated because some people did not want to give up their church, not give up their grave site, where their ancestors were born. They did, where the ancestors were buried. They did not want to give up the closeness that we had as like a family church. Many times we were faced with the opportunity that we were going to lose everything. We were going to lose what we had been brought up with. But then we also had to consider that we could not survive by ourselves. We could not afford a minister. We could not afford a minister full time. We had to think about the future. In doing this merger meetings, we had people that said that they would not go along with going to another church, and they did not. We lost some members that decided that they would not go to another church or go to Fairhaven Church. So this is one of the problems that you had when you're doing something like this. And this was the time that we had to make up our mind whether we were going to step out on faith and realize that this is something that we knew needed to do for our future and for our kids. We realized at that time that we could not carry on this church because we had a pastor that was serving two churches. He was serving our church and he was serving Amber Grove Church over in Gatesburg. So I can remember being a pianist at Pleasantview and then riding with him over to Amber Grove, being the pianist over there. So this is one of the things that we had to think about, whether we could continue paying a minister, part-time minister, I guess you would say, whether we could continue paying him or whether we had to think about the future and merge with someone else. And since those churches were there, and the majority of us were brought up in a community, a Black community that played with white people. So therefore, it didn't seem like such a big thing to merge with Hunting Hill and McDonald Chapel.
Oh, that's so amazing how you drew it back to your upbringing, right? There was already this familiarity, even with some of the people that attended these other congregations. Like some of those folks grew up in the neighborhood. I think that's really amazing. And I also think it's really interesting to hear you talk about this conversation around survival, that people were afraid that the church would be lost if it merged. But then there was also the reality that it might be lost if you didn't merge.
Correct.
And so it was just a conversation about survival and just to hear you talk about having to ultimately decide on faith.
Yes, yes, we did. And when we decided on faith, one of the things that we made up our mind was that we were not going to give up our property. We were not going to sell our property, which included the church and the school and the gravesite. Now, the other two churches sold their property, Hunting Hill and McDonald Chapel, which is where the bank is now. Bank of America is located on 28 and Quince Orchard Road. They sold their property, but we maintained our property. And to this day, we have trustees that are maintaining this property.
Why was that so important?
You need something to look back at. You need to feel that you came from someplace. You need to be able to, when we go down there, we can look at the pictures on the walls and we can see all the different organizations, because even though we were a small church, we had more organizations and they were supported by the same people. You know, we had the Willing Workers Club and we had the Women's Society and we had the Methodist Men. We had every organization that a large church has. And so when we go down there, we can look at the pictures on the wall. We can sit there and remember the wonderful days that we had, although they don't seem like they were wonderful days, but for us at that particular time, it was a wonderful time. And we can remember all of the different meetings that we used to go to. Sometimes we would have the meeting at each other's houses. We used to have dinners. We would furnish the food and then buy the food back from each other. So this was the way that we raised money to keep our church going. So it has so many memories. And to be able to, at this time, ride by on 28 and see that church and just remember where I used to sit in that church, remember that I used to play the piano and play the organ. I can remember sitting beside, having my daughter sit beside your grandfather and knowing that she was safe. She was not going to budge. She was not going to make any noise because she was sitting beside Uncle Gerard. So it was just wonderful to know that we could trust everyone that came there.
You know, one of the things that just touches me about that story is that you proved the folks who thought that if you merged, that everything about Pleasantview would go away. You proved them wrong.
Correct.
Because you were able to both merge and preserve your history.
Correct.
I think that's a powerful lesson for the world, that you don't have to give up all of who you are to participate in something new.
That is correct. And as I said before, the fact that we have the opportunity to continue riding by and see the improvements that are being made to that site, to be able to visit the graves of our ancestors, it's a wonderful feeling.
Now, for those who are going to watch at home and say, okay, then I guess we should just merge everything together and that's going to be easy. We should tell them that the process wasn't easy, right? You mentioned that friends and relatives decided to not merge, right?
That is correct. We have a couple families that decided that they did not want to merge, and they just went on and joined the Baptist church in our community. Even though, and it took a while for them to even come and visit Fairhaven. The merger was not, I'm going to say, easy when we merged with Fairhaven, because there were some white people that did not want us to merge with them, as well as there were Black people from our church that did not go along with the merger. So it was something that, as I said, we started out on faith, and it was something that we accomplished.
Amen. Can you talk about how you came to those compromises? I think the gospel choir is a great example where it seemed like people didn't feel like the African American experience was necessarily showing up in the worship service, and so people met at your house.
That is correct. Alma Risley was one of the persons that said, we do not have any Black singing in this church. We need to form a group. So I had the meeting at our house in the basement, and we decided, we asked anyone that was interested in forming a gospel choir. And we had some white people to come to the meeting. And they were saying, I don't know how to do it, but I'm willing to try. And that they did. Dr. Bill Phillips came and Carolyn Ryan now. So we had a wonderful opportunity to have Black and white choir. And now, well, before the problem that we're having now health-wise, we had a combination of all nationalities in our choir.
Were there ever any moments, Esther, when, in going through the merger, the years afterwards, where you thought maybe this isn't going to work, maybe it's not worth it?
No.
It's too hard?
No. I never had that feeling that it wasn't going to work. I may have had the feeling that this person, I don't particularly like the way this person is doing something, as far as a particular organization or something like that. But then you have to think about, well, they may feel the same way. This is something that they're not used to doing. So a lot of things that we brought to the church from Fairhaven, from Pleasantview, where we were talking about, where I was talking about all these different organizations and so on, we had the opportunity to bring these organizations to Fairhaven. These different groups, they had never heard of a United Methodist Women or Methodist Men or homecoming service. Your grandmother started this homecoming service up there where every member was supposed to bring a chicken in a pie, and they were like, a homecoming service? What is that? A homecoming service is something that you go to a football game, So this is something that we introduced to them, and then we learned from them. So it was a learning process. It was and it's still a learning process, because we have people coming to our church now that may not be Black or white, but of another nationality, and they're introducing to us some of their culture. So we're still learning. So I think Fairhaven will always be a learning church, a church that we can be proud of.
That concept, that sentiment is clearly we're not even at that point in the world in 2021, right? As we look around and we see some of the hatred and the ugliness that's playing out, but we certainly weren't there in 1968.
No.
So what was in the soil of Quince Orchard that you guys even thought that this crazy idea was possible?
I don't remember who thought of the idea, but it was a wonderful idea. I don't remember whether I remember my brother Tompkins and I remember my brother Melvin talking about this is something that we had to do for the future, but I don't remember, you know, we had to think about merging with another church, and those were the other two churches that were the closest to us. You know, the other church that we were in the conference with was Emma Grove, and that was over in Gaithersburg. And of course, Seneca was a community church. And of course, merging with Martinsburg or Barnesville or Poolsville, those churches were way up 28. So why go way out of the way when you have two churches that are right there within 2 miles of each other? 3 churches right there together. So why not take this opportunity and merge those 3 churches?
Absolutely. I love that. It's the practical, it's the obvious answer that we
Yes.
try hard to avoid sometimes. Well, I know you've had experiences where people have been surprised that you go to Fairhaven and they've called it that white church. How do you handle those moments knowing that it is an intentionally integrated congregation?
I can remember going to Church Women United or Church United Methodist meeting at other churches, because other churches would have breakfasts and so on where they would invite all the churches in the community. And I can remember saying something, and I can remember getting the response, "Oh, you go to that white church." And I would say, "The church isn't white, it's brick." And they would laugh. And I would say, "I go to a church with a white congregation. You should try it sometimes." And they said, "Well, you get along okay?" I said, "We get along fine. You need to come over and visit." And they came over and visited, and they came back. And they were like, "Oh my goodness, you got a gospel choir." And then they started to invite in the gospel choir to different activities that they had at their church. The fact that it was an integrated gospel choir, they were like, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know white people had rhythm like that. They could clap, you know, and sing at the same time." It was a wonderful experience to be able to be proud of your home church.
Oh, amen to that. Esther, as we start to wrap up here, I want you to help me think about how the lessons from your experience from Pleasantview to Fairhaven, you know, what do we want to tell Montgomery County? What should Montgomery County appreciate? What lessons should they learn from your experiences?
Montgomery County needs to learn that in this time that we're going through, that there is a future in doing something different. They need to learn what we came through to form Fairhaven. They need to know that it may have been a sacrifice for everyone that joined Fairhaven, but it's something that came to the good. We have at our church so many, many, many different people of color, of different degrees. It's amazing the amount of people that we have with the degrees, especially degrees in the medical field. You know, our church produced a letter about the COVID-19 virus. And this letter consisted of all of the people that had some kind of health education in their background. And it was amazing. I mean, you see people on Sunday morning or you come to a meeting there, but you never think about exactly where they work. Even though we, go out to lunches, we have dinners and so on, but you never think about that. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, look at all the healthcare people that we have, all the doctors and the MDs and all of the different people that we have at Fairhaven. We are blessed." And being blessed is taken, and it has taken in the past, a lot of prayer. As my sister Pearl would say all the time, you have to keep praying. And that's exactly what we did.
I was saying you started to talk about kind of where we are today. Mm-hmm. And I assume you're referencing to some of the hatred and ugliness that is playing out on city streets and across our TVs. And I have to ask, what do you think and feel when you see those images?
Yes, when I see the images, we live in a condo in Kentland, And my husband goes out and walks sometimes. And I've gotten to the point where I have not felt this since the 60s. I'm thinking, he's talking about walking around this secluded place. And I'm like, no, you can't do that with all the rioting and everything that we're having in this day and time. You can't be walking around there by yourself. And he's like, well, what's going to happen? I said, you don't know who's in the car that may ride by and have some kind of animosity towards you. So don't, go in these places. And I got to the point now where, when I go out someplace, I'm constantly looking around, and it's terrible to be able to live in a fear of what may happen because of the day and time that we're living now.
That breaks my heart, but it really is a testament to the terrorism that's happening in the country. I think it's also why things like this are important and why Pleasant View continues to exist. And perhaps my last question will be, what is Too Precious to Lose? This is, for those that don't know, Too Precious to Lose is the theme of Pleasant View, this historic site. And so I ask you, what does that mean, and what should people think about when they see it?
Too Precious to Lose is the correct title for Pleasant View, because we have so many memories going back to my childhood, where I was the last class that went to Quince Elementary School. We have memories of all of the different activities that we have. We have the opportunity to ride by our property. We have the opportunity to reminisce. We look at the grave sites where our ancestors are buried. We have the opportunity to remember the wonderful times that we had in the school, the wonderful services that we had in the church. And we also have the opportunity to gather with neighboring churches that come down there when we need to clean up our facilities. Like the Mormon church in Kentland. They come out when we have a cleanup day, and they come out and they bring all of their trucks and their shovels and everything, and we are weeding. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to get together, and it's mostly white, so here we are down there, just like we were when we first started out with Fairhaven. We are down there together, down in the soil, down in the dirt, trying to keep Pleasant View, which is not really trying, because we're going to make it a historical site, a site of memories, a site that we're not going to let die.
So let me let you give the final word. Do you have other thoughts, questions you hope that I had asked, but other thoughts to share with the audience?
The only thing that I can say about the Pleasant View Historical Site is I am glad that I was born during the time of Pleasant View. To have the opportunity to do without, even though I did not feel as if I was doing without. The opportunity to go to school there, to use the outside toilet, to wrap the maypole, to bring my food and then buy it back. The opportunity to meet friends that are now still my friends after 60, 70 years. The opportunity to be able to merge with another church to form Fairhaven and be able to call that my home church. My prayer every night is for my home church, because all of my memories and everything from Pleasant View went along to Fairhaven. And Fairhaven is now my home church, which consists of McDonald Chapel in Honey Hill.
Well, let me say, take the opportunity to express my appreciation and love and gratefulness for having pioneers like you in my life that made sure that Pleasant View continued to exist, that it was available for our generation, that the lessons that are taught to you have been shared with us, and then also that Fairhaven is a model to draw sanctuary, support, and inspiration, and learning. I love what you said about constant learning. And I know that both of those institutions, as a trustee of Pleasant View, as a founding member of Fairhaven, have been bettered by your presence and continue to, learn and thrive by your continued engagement. So
Amen.
thank you.
I thank you, Jason.